deeming vendors non-responsive. I think we may have agencies that might be doing it differently, and as always, we want to provide consistency across the board for all of our agencies, and so we're going to walk through that process today. And then our fun fact and quote of the day. As usual, this is being recorded, will be posted in our training center, and the slides will be posted as well. Okay, so when deeming vendors non-responsive, let me go back. First off, let's just talk about some of the common reasons that vendors may be deemed non-responsive. And so, and non-responsive in terms of, I also have a message deeming them non-responsible too. So that's a good one to touch on as well. Mostly what we see is non-responsiveness, so that's be more of our highlight today. But yeah, actually we can touch on the non-responsible as well. So common reasons that vendors may be deemed non-responsive. One, they're not registered with the Board of Elections at time of bid opening. That is specifically called out in the code, so there's really no way around that. They have to be registered with the Board of Elections at time of bid opening. Number two, they just don't meet the specifications laid out in the solicitation. Also, if they submit Forms B without an active IPG registration. Sometimes we see this when they may have submitted to IPG, or they had submitted an application to IPG, but they haven't been approved yet and fully registered, and they haven't received that active IPG registration number. So on Forms B, there actually is a specific place where they need to put in their IPG registration number for that year, and it is a different number each year. So in that case, if a vendor, we would always suggest to a vendor that they just submit Forms A at that point, but sometimes we do see where they submit Forms B, but they don't have an IPG registration at the time of the bid opening. And so they have to be deemed non-responsive at that point. And also if they do not submit a completed BEP utilization plan. Any of the other specific questions regarding BEP utilization plan, I'm kind of going a more of a higher level today, but if you have those specific questions on what is a completed BEP utilization plan, that'll have to be more on a case-by-case basis. But for instance, if they don't submit a BEP utilization plan, or they submit one that's blank, they would be deemed non-responsive. Okay, so in those cases, yes, so a blank U plan would be non-responsive. Okay, so let's just walk through the steps, just so we're all on the same page. And like I said, we want to have that consistency across the board for all of our agencies. So first off, you would complete the non-responsive form. Technically, it's called request for and determination of non-responsive and non-responsible form. But mostly what we'll call it is just the non-responsive form. That's normally the way we would talk about it. And we have a link here. It's on the CPOGS Procurement Resource Library. And actually, you know what? Let's just go out and take a look at that real quick. So you'll complete this non-responsive form. I had it pulled up here. It's just that the link is in the slide. It'll take you directly to this request for and determination of non-responsiveness and not responsible. So you complete, you put the bid number here, and you would just complete the information, putting in your name, your title, the date, and then you can see where you would actually only have one form for multiple vendors. So you're not going to fill out a form specifically. If you have multiple vendors that are that you're requesting to be deemed non-responsive, you're not going to complete a form for each individual vendor. You can just put them all in one form. And so you would put the name of the vendor. Are you disqualifying them for being non-responsive, not responsible, or both? You complete that field. The factual basis for disqualification. This is just where you're explaining the reason why. Vendor was not registered with Board of Elections at time of bid opening. That's clear enough. Any factual basis that the SPO would need to be updated on, or anything for the procurement file regarding deeming a vendor non-responsive, would be put right in this factual basis for disqualification. And that can just be a narrative. That's just explaining the reason why you're requesting that they are being deemed non-responsive. Then the statute, rule, solicitation requirement basis for disqualification. This is where you're going to call out the specific part of the code, or in rule, or in solicitation requirement. We ask for this specific, if they didn't meet specifications, for instance. You can put a point on page 3, the specifications is this. You can put that there. Then you would leave these next 2 fields blank because those will be for your SPO. And the SPO would complete the approval or denial for each vendor. So they would put approve or deny for each one. And then there's a field there for the SPO to provide additional comments if they would like to. And then the SPO signs, and then let's go back to our slides, back to our process there. So the first thing will be to complete that form, then email that form to the SPO for approval and signature, or denying and signature. Either way, even if the SPO disagrees and is going to deny, they still will sign that, and it still goes into the procurement file. Right. So, and then at that point, you notify the vendor explaining why they are non-responsive. Email is fine. We say notify because I believe in the past some agencies would actually send a letter to the vendor, but an email is okay. However, you're not going to attach that non-responsive form because remember that non-responsive form, it is just an internal document for the procurement file, but also it could have multiple vendors on that form. So you do not attach that non-responsive form. However, you do explain to the vendor why they were deemed non-responsive. Okay, so you would go ahead and, because the overall goal here is we want an informed vendor community so that they know next time on another procurement how they can fix and for instance, we keep using the Board of Elections registration example. We want them to be registered for the Board of Elections. Not want them. They need to be registered for the Board of Elections in order to be successful with an IFB, an RFP, or RFI leasing. These are all affecting IFBs, RFPs, and RFI leasing. You would not follow this process on your small purchases, deeming them non-responsive. That's a slightly different process. This is specifically for our IFBs, RFPs, and RFI leasing. And then at that point, you attach the signed non-responsive form and that email to the vendor to the bid tab. And so let's go to our next slide here because I just recently updated the IFB, RFP, and RFI leasing job aids just late last week. And so we'll talk about exactly what we did. So this is in the bid tab. I published it on May 27th, so that was last Thursday, I believe. So we added in the bid tab what it used to say was completed non-responsive form, if applicable. Now, some agencies were doing this and reading it slightly differently, so we wanted to provide specific clarification on what we mean by completed non-responsive form. Some agencies were following the process that we have, sending it to the SPO, and then it was being attached. However, some agencies were completing it without it being signed by the SPO and then attaching it to the bid tab. So we want to provide specific clarification moving forward. And so in the bid tab, we have updated, you can see it in red, what I added, the non-responsive form signed by the SPO, if applicable, and the agency notification to the vendor explaining non-responsiveness. Now, so that right below that on the job aid, it also says any communications. So that communication, the email to the vendor, would fall under that that umbrella of communications. So if you were already doing this process, you were already doing it correctly. We just wanted to specifically call out that we want that agency notification to the vendor. That needs to be a part of the bid tab at that point as well. And then a couple notes regarding this process. Notify the vendor once the SPO signs and returns the non-responsive form. Really what it comes down to is there's no reason to wait. There's no reason, the sooner the better. There's really no reason to wait to contact and let those vendors know they've been deemed non-responsive. The vendor has 14 days to protest being deemed non-responsive, and it's best practice not to wait until the award is made. And so really what this does is it helps to avoid any delays because the vendor does have 14 days to protest. And you may say, well, Dave, isn't that why we have the protest period? We have a 14-day protest period after the award. And that's the case. That is true. However, it's best practice to let the vendor know sooner if they're being deemed non-responsive, because they at that point it starts the clock for their 14 days. So you could have, let's just use it as an example here. Um, it on IFBs, it's going to be normally it moves a little bit quicker, or at least it should, in terms of deeming a vendor non-responsive and then turning around and being able to do an award. But that's not always the case. We know that. Um, However, if you contact a vendor for maybe they didn't meet specifications, for instance, you contact the vendor, they now have 14 days to protest them being deemed non-responsive. But let's say if you wait until award and there were no other protests, you could have immediately gone to contract execution after the 14-day protest period. But if you didn't contact that vendor, now they protest. It could be on day 14, and then that can just cause some delays. So any chance we can here to provide efficiency and make that process move a little bit smoother and get to contract quicker and properly, that's what we want to do. So it's our best practice to contact that vendor as soon as you can. And as always, if you have any questions regarding these and on a case by case basis, you can always reach out to your SPO or me as well. Let's see. Sorry, I'm missing a couple questions here. What if you have 150 vendors? Um, if you have 150 vendors being deemed non-responsive, um, that's probably going to be a new record. So we'll do a whole Training Tuesday all about that. Um, that's I don't mean to make a joke. I just say that's not going to happen. Um, but we still do need to contact the vendors if they're being deemed non-responsive. So to give you a drier answer, you would email 150 emails to those vendors. Let's see, we have a couple here. It would be very helpful to have a list of bases for disqualification with the appropriate rule matched up to it. I understand it may not be an all-inclusive list, but maybe we could have the most frequent items added to as more things come up. Just an idea. Thanks for all you do. I appreciate that. Yeah, that's a good idea. There are some of those common ones. Um, Another question, it would be for a reason that cannot be remedied after the fact, right? Yes. So these are situations where when they're deemed non-responsive, these aren't curable items. Um, so you notice I didn't say in terms of the being deemed non-responsive, um, if you have to have a Forms A corrected or something like that. If a vendor submits Forms A, but as a part of the review, maybe they left out something here and there. Those sorts of items are the ones that are correctable. These would be only for those that cannot be remedied after the fact. So like I said, the code specifically calls out bidder offers being registered with the Board of Elections at time of bid. So there's really no way around that. If the vendor was not registered on at the time of bid, there's just no way around that one. So that's one that unfortunately we do see. We are hoping to remedy that, and a lot of this comes down to, like I said, having a vendor community that's a little more knowledgeable about some of these things, and anything that we can do to help them understand those rules and regulations, we want to do that. What if a vendor forgets to submit Forms A or Forms B? That has to be at time of bid as well. Because they have to have the um, conflicts of interest and financial disclosures question. If a vendor submits Forms B without IPG registration, can it be cured by allowing them to submit Forms A? Once again, no, they can't, because at the time of their bid, they have to submit the financial disclosures and conflicts of interest. If they fail to do that, that's one of those that is, unfortunately, they have to be deemed non-responsive. Missed a few other questions here. Let me go back up. How about when their submitted BEPU plan is deemed non-responsive by BEP, do they get a one-time cure? Yeah, I'm going to have to refer you there to the BEP's documentation on how the curability of the BEP utilization plan. So that is laid out specifically with them. And if you have those types of questions, I'd have to refer you to BEP. Should there be a standard form to send to the vendor? Oh, I'm guessing probably regarding the standard form to let the vendor know what they were deemed non-responsive for. Um, I don't think so, just because it's you're just letting them know why they were deemed non-responsive. I mean, if you have it would just be one other form to complete, honestly. Whereas if you could copy and paste from that form that little factual piece if you wanted to and just put it in the email, that would be fine. It's just contacting the vendor sooner to let them know that they've been deemed non-responsive. And specifically, and we've been talking about IFBs, but think about on an RFP, if they weren't registered with the Board of Elections at the time of the bid opening, there's no reason to even go through the whole technical proposal. And if there's any other reasons why they're deemed non-responsive, certainly you wouldn't open pricing from that vendor. And so, you wouldn't want to wait until the very end and, or not the end, the at award, and that the first time that that vendor even knows that they didn't one or was deemed non-responsive is that timeline for an RFP can be quite extensive, and so then that just raises up whole other issues there regarding that. So we want to make sure that we're contacting those vendors as soon as we can. Yep, non-responsive form is formal bids only, IFB, RFP. Small purchases, I think people may get confused between bid by bid or IFB bid. Yeah, so I appreciate that. Yeah. So like I said earlier, this is specifically for IFBs, RFPs, and RFIs leasing. This isn't, this process is not required for your small purchases. Sorry, I'm getting caught up in a few of the questions here. Let me scroll back up. Is agency notification to vendor explaining non-responsiveness now required if it's on the job aid? Well, it was always our best practice to contact that vendor. In terms of requiring, yeah, because it's, that's something that needs to be in the procurement file. So as an SPO at the bid tab, those are things that I'm looking for is if anybody was deemed non-responsive, is that non-responsive form in there? Is it signed by me? And then is that communications, which was always a part of our process, the communications piece, right, on our job aids. It's just now we're specifically calling out on the job aid that notification to the vendor needs to be there. Will CPOGS create a form for agencies to use? Um, well, we have the non-responsive form, so that is the form to use. I'm guessing you're probably asking the same question in terms of what to send to the vendor. And like I said, I don't think we need a whole nother form for that because we wouldn't want to share the form, the non-responsive form, because it could have multiple vendors' information on there. Um, but in terms of a standardized form to send to the vendor, is I don't foresee that being something that we will be providing just because, like I said, all it is communicating it to the vendor why they were deemed non-responsive. Um, that's something I could take back though and see if that's something that we would want to do. What if you only have two vendors and get it all done in one day? Why would you do a separate email outside of bid buy if you can attach and submit all at once? Okay, so that's a good question, specifically to if it's happening all in one day. You still want to contact that vendor that they were deemed non-responsive though. So you're still going to follow the process, but if it can happen all in one day, that's great. It's just though that protest period would line up. Because again, it comes back to we wouldn't want that vendor to know or to think that they just didn't win Or it can provide different other confusion too. If they see the notice of award and their price was lower, that's going to cause more confusion. They're going to protest, right? When really maybe the reason why they were deemed non-responsive, or they need to know that they were deemed non-responsive for a specific reason. That's where really where that comes down to. It's not necessarily that it happens on the same day. For instance, if they just receive notification from BidBuy that, oh, I didn't win because I wasn't the low cost. Okay, now the next time I want to submit to something, let's say that I'm the vendor, and I am not registered for Board of Elections, but I'm never told that I need to be, or that communication doesn't come to me. The next time I submit, I'm still going to be deemed non-responsive, and I still haven't been told that I have to be registered or that I was deemed non-responsive on these previous procurements. So a lot of this just comes down to notifying that vendor so they're aware, they can fix it, they can and learn and have a so we can have more competition and more responsive vendors because that's really where we're trying to aim here. Okay, CMS has a letter that shows what made them non-responsive as well as what else could have been needed to be cured if they had been responsive. Okay, yeah, that's helpful. Scrolling back up here, sorry. And I think we've made it through most of these. Oh, I see. Sorry, I meant could you attach the non-responsive form to the for the SPO to sign at the bid tab instead of sending it in an email. The reason we want to have it in the because we want to confirm as the SPO that we're making the award. So we do want to keep that a separate process. So we do want to keep it in an email to the SPO. The email sends it back to you, and then it gets attached to the bid tab. So we're awarding when we award at the bid tab, the non-responsive form should be signed by the SPO. All right, and then okay, I think we're all caught up here. All right, and then of course, like I said earlier, if you have specific questions or specific scenarios, reach out to your SPO, your APO, and we can get any of your questions answered. Let me make sure I didn't miss any questions. Oh, I can't find it. Oh, here we go. What is curable? Sorry, when someone puts in a new question, it flips me down to the bottom. What is curable on a Forms A submittal? Wet signatures versus electronic, missing names, missing signatures, etc. So that's pretty specific in terms of the Forms A, wet signature versus electronic, missing names, missing signatures, etc. So as long as they have submitted the Forms A, there are those things that can be corrected. If they did not submit a Forms A, then there's nothing to correct. So a lot of those sorts of issues can be corrected for your Forms A. The issue we run into is a vendor doesn't submit anything, and then they have to be deemed non-responsive. And then what is the link to the job aid? So on our job aid, your timing was perfect. Um, So the job aid, well, I guess this isn't the link to it. We are going to do bid by our monthly training. This is just kind of the standard slide that we always have here on our training Tuesday slides. It's the second Wednesday of every month. And I'll put a link in the chat here for the link to the job aids. And that should be something that's just a favorite or a bookmark it or favorite in your browser. Um, So the second Wednesday of each month, so it'll be next Wednesday, Wednesday, June 9th. We will provide our monthly bid buy training. We'll have 4 different sessions per usual. Do an overview, general navigation, small purchase under 10, small purchase over 10, and then release off master. Nothing's really changing from month to month here. If you have gone through this training in the past, um, feel free to join in as a refresher. This is required for any new users for BidBuy as well. And so you can find the information there. I just leave the slides here just in case. You can always go back to our slides and find our BidBuy monthly training. But this is also on our CPOGS website. In the here's the link to CPOGS. Our Training Tuesdays is here. We get this question quite a bit. Where can I find Training Tuesday and the BidBuy training links? And then the BidBuy monthly training link is in the CPOGS calendar of events. So you can just select on that page there. Excuse me, let me go back down here. Another, is the same true for Forms B, that as long as it was submitted and they have an active IPG registration, the Forms B can be cured? Um, I guess I'm not, I'm curious, I would be curious about what needs to be cured on a Forms B, honestly, just because it's set up so that there isn't a whole lot of information that needs to be on there. I'd have to say that I'd probably have to punt that as a case by case basis. If they, for instance, if they, I don't know, I'm not going to try to come up with different issues if they didn't sign it, or maybe if they submitted a blank Forms B or nothing's there. Um, you could certainly be non-responsive at that point. Let's see. And then I have another suggestion for another Training Tuesday that I'll circle back to later. Okay, what section is the job aid listed under on the resources page? Why don't I go back out to that real quick before we get to our fun fact of the day. So here's our CPOGS website, right? Um, you have the link to the training resources page. I just have it up here in my favorite browsers, but you can also hit bid buy and then go to bid buy resources for state agencies. And so the link, what section is the job aid listed on the resources page, you just scroll down to the bottom and they're all listed there. Okay, so if I was doing a small purchase, I would go hit the subject of small purchase and it pops up the job aid there. If I'm doing an IFB, I select on that subject IFB and it goes to the job aid here. And so you can see on our job aids too, we always have a running total. Of course, we update the version anytime we change anything, as well as I put the date that it was published. Sometimes that can be helpful as well. If you know you haven't done an IFB, in this case, since last Thursday, you're going to use that most recent version. But we always say, and honestly, from a workflow standpoint, to me, it just seems easier that anytime you would do one, you would just go directly to this page, and then I have it pulled up as a tab, and I talk about this in all my trainings too, is that way I have it on a tab. It's right there. And then I go to bid buy and put in my information, and I can flip back between the tabs. That just makes it easier, and you're always using the most recent version of our job aids. Okay, so let's go back to our last couple slides here. I know we went a little bit longer today. So our fun fact today, we'll keep it quick. The CIA headquarters has its own Starbucks, but baristas don't write names on the cups. Its receipts say store number 1 instead of Starbucks, and its workers need an escort to leave their work posts. Now, my question is, you saying, Dave, how do you even know that? That's CIA headquarters. And the answer is because the internet told me to. So the internet said so. So I'm going with that. And then finally, our quote of the day, play and practice like you're trying to make the team. So I am currently elbow deep in kids competitive sports, and so I love these type of quotes. But it is, not that procurement is a competition or anything, but it just reminds us, to put our best foot forward. Just especially after a long weekend like this, we can use the little bit of the inspiration. Play and practice like you're trying to make the team. From Coach K. I'm not a huge Duke fan, but you know, when you're right about things, you're right about things. So everybody have a great rest of your week. If we have any follow-up questions or conversations to have, reach out to your SPO or me, and we can get those questions answered for you. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your week.